Everything is now unity, and imagination is now manifestation. Welcome to Unity Manifest Podcast. Here is your host, Gary Cacciolillo. Enjoy the experience.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Unity Manifest Podcast. Today, we're lucky to have a great guest today. His name is Paul Anthony Wallis. He's been on before, I think about 5 books ago. He has Scars of Eden. So he's written a whole lot since then. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How you going, Gary?
I'm doing great. So, where do you want to start? Since we got about 5 books to cover in an hour.
Well, um, well, Scars of Eden is probably quite a good place to start because it was the book in my series, the Eden series, that asked the question, what difference does it make if our ancestors had contact in the deep past? What difference might it make if we had contact in the present? And I think contact in the present is very much in the news with the whole process of disclosure question mark that's happening in the United States right now.
Yeah, we're just like mentioning, like I'm kind of surprised at the lack of um attention that it's gotten.
Yes, I find that extraordinary. I mean, 3 years ago, when we had the Congressional House Oversight Subcommittee hearing with David Grush and David Fravor and Ryan Graves, I was surprised that that wasn't given more press because the information that came out through that process, information that had been sort of permitted for release by the Inspector General of the intelligence community, that information was quite earth-shattering. But at that time, it was really only Ross Coulthart who was running with that story and why it was so important. And in the time since, I mean, at that time, I think there were 42 sworn testimonies from military intelligence officers regarding information they had access to, or even eyewitness testimony. And yet, barely a ripple in the mainstream news. More has been released since, more witnesses have come forward. And I think the quietness of the response is probably down to a couple of things. And one is people's editors. I find that reporters are still being told by their editors, we don't run these stories. And so there are reporters and journalists interested in pushing the conversation forward, but who simply don't have the clearance from their agencies, their platforms, their magazines to do so. But I think the other side of it is that we are in an age where the public has been so bombarded by information, news, fake news, that people have been desensitized to quite earth-shattering information. I mean, there's so much going on in 2026, not just with regard to disclosure, that should absolutely scandalize people, but people are informationed out. I think they are, what's the word, overstimulated. And I think that is one of the reasons for this lack of public response.
That's weird in a way. You think it's done on purpose? Think we're overstimulated on purpose? Somebody is overstimulating us to see what happens?
Yes, I do. I would encourage people to watch the movie Gladiator, which is a very good illustration of how powers seek to maintain control over their nations, their empires, through overstimulation. And Gladiator is, of course, about a Roman emperor who comes to power, wants to seize power, wants to run the empire for his own benefit, and he simply distracts people from everything he's doing by putting on lots of shows with gladiators. And I think it's the same in the 21st century. Very
That
similar.
is that easy to distract humans. I would thought maybe we would have evolved a little bit further since then, or at
We
least
seem to be,
become wiser to the trick.
yeah, you would think so. We seem to be wired the same way, don't we?
It is kind of strange. Um, so a lot of your work, I know it has to do with sort of like the ancient alien type of things. One of the things that I usually tend to kind of look at a little bit differently, I think sometimes, like to me, like it, I think we came from somewhere. We in a way we are aliens. We forget that we're on a ball floating through space. So the idea of being created by extraterrestrials for us for some reason seems foreign, even though it's not, because we're actually part of this larger ecosystem that we somehow constantly deny ourselves that we're not a part of.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I'm impressed by the age of the theory that life did not originate on planet Earth. And it was really from the get-go with regard to DNA research back when Francis Crick was one of the two co-discoverers of the double
Mhm.
helix structure of DNA. He said that the structure of genetic coding was such that the timelines for planet Earth just weren't long enough for these structures to have evolved on a planet. And he believed they had to have evolved in space. And once you consider that possibility, you have to consider that life might be the norm in the cosmos rather than the exception. That if the genetic coding for biological conscious intelligent life comes from space, it may be as endemic to the substance and properties of the universe as the properties of light or the properties of gravity. And if that's the case, then whenever that genetic coding lands in an amenable environment, it will result in forms of life similar to the ones we're familiar with and maybe different as well. But what it means at root is that the universe is populated and all life in the universe is related. And you just have to sit with that for a little while to realize that probably means that we are not the alpha species in the cosmos, that we are sitting somewhere in the middle rankings of intelligent life. And then you have to think further and say, well, what might that mean? What would contact have looked like if we're not the alpha species? Is it possible we might have been contacted, visited, exploited? And I go to ancestral stories and indigenous stories, ancient texts for my answers to those questions. And I find that our ancestors all around the world say, yes, we were visited. Those who visited us were smarter than us, and they had a little hand in our development as a species.
It does show up throughout various cultures. I know that, like you see it in the Hopi myth, you'll see it in the Sumerian myth, you'll see it in the Bible, you see it everywhere. The idea of some beings coming from space and influencing human evolution.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think you say it's there in the Bible, and of course, that was my start point of beginning to recognize that there were contact narratives in the Bible. And one of the reasons that I had missed that through my more than 30 years in Christian ministry, I was a theological educator, church doctor, archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia. That's one down from a bishop. So I was very involved, not only in teaching from the Bible, but in training pastors in hermeneutics, how to interpret the Bible. And I had missed that there were these contact narratives there. And one of the reasons was I hadn't dug deep enough into translation questions. But the other was that I had, for a long time, read the Bible in a bubble, where the Bible was the only ancestral story I was reading. And I find as soon as you start reading the Bible alongside the source narratives from ancient Mesopotamia,
Mhm.
or alongside Native American story, you mentioned the Hopi myth, for instance, or alongside Mesoamerican story, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, for instance, or alongside African story, the story of the Efik people, the Yoruba people, the Edo people, Filipino creation narratives, Norse creation narratives. As soon as you put the Bible in context, read it alongside other stories of beginnings, you'll realize there are these patterns that repeat all around the world. And it's in the overlaps that you find these memories of trauma in our cultural memories, human beings, memories of near extinction events, and memories of visitation and colonization by more intelligent galactic neighbors. It's a global story and it's there in the Bible. And I believe if we did a better work of translation of the Bible, then believers around the world would have the front foot on this whole process. It would not be a surprise to them that we're in a populated universe.
Hmm. It's also like one of the ones that's also very prevalent is the Vedas.
Sorry, to say again?
In the Vedas too, there's a lot of
Oh, yes, it's absolutely there in the Vedas. That's right. And what's so interesting about the Vedic stories of contact is that those ancient scribes had no self-consciousness in presenting a non-human intelligent being as exactly that. They didn't make it sound mysterious and spiritual. No, this was a person. And same with technology. They don't try and make technology sound like something religious and spiritual. No, the kings had flying technology. They used this kind of fuel. They could travel at this speed. They could destroy this many people with their weapons. They're very, very open about all that. And I find the Vedas fascinating. I need to study them a great deal more because there's a wealth of information in them. Today, for instance, if you hear somebody talking about having a close encounter with a shape-shifting entity, our initial reaction is, okay, were you on your meds at the time? Or we might ask, is the shape-shifting entity in the room with us now? Would be very skeptical because
Mhm.
shapeshifter, really, that's just science fiction, isn't it? Not according to the Vedas. In the Vedas, it's clear that there are these beings who are essentially reptilian beings, but they can present themselves as human to a human audience. That is ancient story. That's not a freak story from a freaky person in the present. It's ancient ancestral story. And when you find it there, and then you start reading the Bible, for instance, and you've got a character who, in moments, appears to be a reptilian because
Mhm.
he's being described physically. And then in another moment, just seems to be another guy who happens to be ruling a particular tribe. That
Mhm.
slippage from human to reptilian, we miss it in the Bible. And people who read the Bible in a bubble will say, okay, well, let's take the anthropomorphic bit seriously. And then when he's described as a bird or a reptile, we'll call that poetry. That's a completely arbitrary invention to try and manage what's in the Bible. And the Vedas don't have that problem at all. They will say here the Nagas are reptilian, and here the Nagas have presented themselves as human. That is an ancient human experience if we take the Vedas seriously.
One of the things too in ancient, you see it all the time, like in the glyphs and stuff, pictures of like what we would call grays or mantis beings, ant people, all those kind of things show up in ancient rock carvings.
Yes, well, sometimes that can be overstated, but certainly beings that look like small greys are not difficult to find around the world. And yes, I would agree with you that insectoid or mantoid type beings do also appear in ancient carvings in North America, for instance. And again, when we find these carvings or carvings of beings that look almost human but a bit reptilian, there's always a conventional explanation which goes only halfway. Oh, this is how the wise ones were
Mhm.
portrayed. Oh, this is how we show um, social advancement. This is how we show political authority. This is how we portray beings who were wiser than everybody else. Of course, the question is why? Why do we portray someone as part human, part bird to communicate that? Or part human, part snake to communicate? Why is that the convention? And we always have to dig deeper, especially when those associations are global. I mean, just to take one example, maybe 200 years ago, if we read the Mayan story of feathered reptilians, the feathered serpents, we would have said, clearly this is in the fiction basket because no such being is possible. And then in 1861, we discovered a feathered reptilian, Archaeopteryx. And more recently, we discovered Sinosauropteryx, which is a very similar creature, a reptile with feathers. And now we're digging up dinosaurs that appear to have feathers.
Mhm.
And paleontologists are now suggesting that dinosaurs from the Velociraptor to the T-Rex may have been covered in entire feather systems. So 200 years ago, we'd have said feathered serpent impossible, that must be fiction. Now we're discovering that feathered serpents were the dominant species on the planet for 68 million years. That's how wrong we can get things when we're wanting to define what's possible and not possible.
Do you ever think that this planet is just a giant genetic petri dish?
Well, I think any planet of a suitable size with water on it and close enough to the
Mhm.
star is a giant petri dish. We all know how powerful nature is if we leave our backyard unattended for 12 months. Put that on a planetary scale, that's how it works. And so it comes back to Francis Crick's idea that genetic coding for life is throughout the galaxy. And so many planets are petri dishes. And going back to what I said before, we shouldn't be surprised if life turns up that looks a bit similar to us when we realize we don't have a monopoly on DNA, we don't have a monopoly on genetic coding. So we shouldn't be surprised to find beings with two legs, two arms, a head, and a torso turning up and trying to interact with us. At the same time, we should be open to life taking very, very different forms, maybe mixed forms as we would consider them here on Earth, and maybe forms of life that are quite beyond our imagining. And of course, our ancestors go there as well. They had language for interdenominational or energy-based life.
So you're talking about life without bodies. But before we get there, do you think that it's okay for humans to modify DNA to create new species?
Well, is it okay? Um, Well, that's an interesting question. Okay, by my standards or by God's
I
standards,
don't know. Do
I
you think it's morally? Do you think it's
well,
something that we'll even try? Or
I
do you think we've already done it?
I
Maybe.
think it's something that happens. I think it's something that other more advanced species have done. So when we're reading the Bible or the Enuma Elish or the Atrahasis tablets or the Mayan Popol Vuh, there are stories of genetic manipulation told to explain why Homo sapiens sapiens are the way we are. So I actually think we have to say thank you for some genetic modification if we're happy to be Homo sapiens in the way we are. As to us doing it, I think where I go soft on this is when somebody asks me, do you think we should try and bring back the woolly mammoth? And I always think it would be lovely to have woolly mammoths. And if we can get there with a little bit of tweaking of elephant DNA, let's have a go. I don't really believe that if we tried to re-engineer a woolly mammoth, we'd end up living in Jurassic World. But of course, that's the danger. You don't know what you're unleashing. You don't know what this does to the ecological balance. But I wouldn't be totally precious about it because our ancestors tell us this has happened before and has happened more than once.
I think we're going to end up doing it to ourselves too, because we kind of, if we're going to exist in space, don't we have to kind of change our bodies a little bit?
Well, yes. Yes is the short answer to that question. But if we listen closely to the scientists who've spoken publicly about their work on the legacy program, so that's the US military intelligence community has units, which I say they have it, they're actually units within the aerospace corporations because the work has been delegated there to reverse engineer materials obtained through UAP retrievals. And the materials appear to that we're trying to replicate appear to create a little time-space bubble. What we're trying to do is produce materials that can generate a stable wormhole. Because if you can do that, you don't have to spend weeks, months, and years in space to get places. You just ping through um, space-time to get there. In the way that we see, for instance, Tic Tacs just pinging into our airspace as if from nowhere. So I think if we can master that kind of tech, then changing our bodies to live in outer space, probably less important.
It does make sense. So then we're just wasting all this time shooting rockets into space.
Well,
You know,
maybe we are. Maybe that's kind of a sideshow, of a kind of a distraction from the real work of trying to get us to a place where we are an interstellar species.
one of the actually things I was looking at recently is like, you know, how like, you know, Elon Musk has SpaceX. And I was also sort of looking into like who owns certain content on certain channels, you know, and he kind of shows up. I think it's weird. It's weird. I think he has an interest in interdimensional stuff.
Yes, I think he
And he's
would
also
have
shooting
to.
rockets at the same time.
Well, here's a curious puzzle. If we look at the texts in the Bible, which I suggest are contact experiences remembered, we have two, maybe three different kinds of technology being referred to when it comes to travel. We have in Ezekiel something
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like some kind of a drone because it has wings that move, it has a roaring engine, and it can seat two people. And Ezekiel describes how it felt when it lifted him off the ground. He said, the hand of the Lord was heavy upon me. He's describing being pushed into his seat as the thing lifts up, and he describes the textures, the wings, the sounds of the engine. Sounds like some kind of a drone. But then that appears to be a capsule relating to a larger object called a kavod, which is a big, heavy thing. And when we read about that in Exodus, it appears to launch and land vertically. It is a column with fire and smoke that surrounds it, and it's metallic. The ground shakes when it launches and lands, and you have to clear a great area around it when it launches and lands. That sounds like a rocket. I would defy anyone to read those texts and describe it another way. And of course, Moses has to be hidden in a cleft in the rock so he can see the thing as it moves away. And if he's not sheltered, then he would be blown to bits. So the story goes. So there's rocket
He did get
technology.
sunburned,
And he
right?
did get sunburn. That's true. And people often ask me, what on earth is rocket technology doing there? That doesn't make any sense. You can't travel through the galaxy with rockets. Well, no, you can't. And that's why I would point to the beginning of Ezekiel and the end of the story of Elijah, where a hole in the sky opens up and then the craft comes through the hole in the sky. Well, we would have language for that today. It says it says the sky opens, so there's a hole in space, and then the craft comes through a whirlwind wind and lands on the ground. Well, that sounds like a wormhole to me if we're going to use more modern language. So we've got possibly three different kinds of tech described there.
Hmm.
And it may seem odd to us that an advanced species would use anything that sounds like a drone or use anything that sounds like a rocket. Less surprising that they might ping through a stable wormhole, but it's all there in the Bible once we translate those texts according to the root meanings of the words instead of just reading the familiar English translations of what's there in the Hebrew.
So you're saying you could just fire a rocket into the sky through the wormhole and then out into another dimension and land it.
There may be a bit more detail and finessing to the story than our ancestors picked up, because all this is described to us by writers who had no technological grid. They didn't understand what they were looking at. They just tried to describe faithfully what it looked like. And I think when we read these texts, not only in the Bible, but in stories around the world, and picture what the writer is saying, and then ask what language would I put to those pictures, that's when the story really opens up.
If extraterrestrials have a hand in our planet now, why do you think these just sort of sit back and watch us destroy ourselves?
Oh gosh, well, that is a very good question. I think history would suggest that there are some boundaries. I mean, how close can we get to destroying ourselves before there's some kind of intervention and restraining hand? Of course, it is possible we may have destroyed ourselves without a restraining hand. And among the files that have been released are files that relate to American, I think it was American and Russian warheads that were switched off by an unknown intelligence in the 1950s. That looks like a restraining hand. People listening to us today will probably know that the UFO phenomenon really spiked immediately after the Second World War. In fact, following the detonations at Trinity, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, all of a sudden we're seeing saucer-shaped craft filling our skies around the world. That also looks like a restraining hand. Pravda, the Russian news agency, reported openly that at the near total meltdown of Chernobyl, there was a flying saucer in the sky nearby, seemingly observing. Again, that looks like a concern that we don't nuke ourselves to oblivion. So there may be some boundaries that our neighbors are wishing to keep us within in terms of self-destruction. But I asked the same question that you asked, Gary, because there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of hijacking of power right now. How difficult do things have to get for the great mass of humanity before we would see, our friends in high places stepping in? But of course, it's a puzzle because there's a lot of contact, I believe, that's happening behind closed doors. And I think one of the controversial questions around acknowledging present contact is the question of who's in charge, who's calling the shots, who's having conversations with our visitors, what decisions are being made, in whose interests are those decisions being made. It would be reassuring to have some answers to those kinds of questions. But if we take seriously the testimony of somebody like Brigadier General Haim Eshed, who for 28 years was Israel's chief of space security, so it was his job to know if we're in contact, his job to know if there was any threat. He says we've been in contact at a covert government level for around 80 years. So I guess with regard to these questions, you and I have a lot of catching up to do.
Then one of the other things that I do think about, like, I've had other guests say the reason that they're here is because of the nuclear activity. Then I think to myself, like, okay, I can see how it could be bad, but there are trillions of planets out there in the universe that probably have life that are like in a Goldilocks zone. And there's billions of stars that are exploding every day. None of it's a big deal. A human A bomb is really nothing compared to like an exploding sun.
Well, that's true, but I suppose it depends how close you live. And we don't perhaps fully appreciate what it does to the fabric of space-time when you start detonating nuclear weapons. So I would say that it's a code in the Star Trek universe. When we go to the story in Star Trek of First Contact, we're first contacted by our neighbors, the Vulcans, when they pick up the warp signature, which means suddenly we can do interstellar travel. And I think that was Gene Roddenberry's code for it was spotted when we first started detonating nukes. And it is detected and it is a worry. And it does attract attention from beings who may already have had us in their sights even before that time, given the ancient stories of contact.
Hmm. Do you think their motives are altruistic?
I think we are presently in contact with quite a range of galactic neighbors with a range of agendas. And it's something that took me by surprise when I first started probing paleocontact in the Bible to recognize that there's a range of conflicting agendas with regard to Project Earth and Project Humanity. So I think we have some in high places who are interested in Earth and what Earth has to offer, others who are interested in human beings from the perspective of exploitation, having a workforce. Some like the planet as a staging post, perhaps. That's the implication of Genesis 11, the question of whether or not there should be an interstellar staging post on planet Earth. And some are here because they like human beings. They have a sort of paternalistic attitude towards us. Perhaps they're the ones who had the most recent hand in the development of life on Earth, and they still feel they've got a stakeholding in what's happening here. But certainly our ancestors said there are different kinds of being, different kinds of
Mhm.
agenda. They conflict with one another. There's some kind of an uneasy truce in which they co-manage what's happening here. And I think it's important for us to know that because when we talk about contact today, it's unhelpful to see it through a single lens. And I think a lot of the conversation in Washington about contact is framed through the question of security. Is there an existential threat? Is this a national security threat, a planetary threat? And I think it's easy perhaps to get budgets if you use that kind of language, but it distorts what's going on because there are those who might be menacing towards us, but there are others who I believe are friends in high places, and we need to be doing intelligent exopolitics and not think, all aliens are the same, or the only good alien is a dead alien. Pick a single lens, and you're going to be making terrible mistakes.
How do we know who to trust?
Well, I wish I wish you and I were in the room to make those calls, because it comes back to who is representing us. I would be worried if I thought that our visitors were only talking to the chiefs of our military, for instance, or our defense forces. I'd be worried if they were only talking to senior politicians. I'd be worried if I thought they were only talking to the chiefs of aerospace corporations. But again, when I get into ancestral story, it tells me that contact doesn't happen in those ways only, that contact experiences are happening all around the world with perfectly ordinary people, and that our visitors are putting their picture of humanity together on the basis of far more information. But as to who's representing us, what is their emotional intelligence? What calculations are they making? I think that's a very real question, and I think that's why we need more disclosure, more declassification, so that we can have some more informed and intelligent conversation on exactly these questions.
I never buy the stories where people say they want us for food.
No, no, I don't. I don't. I think there are probably some disturbing and dark reasons for some of the interest we enjoy. So if you start looking into abduction narratives, you might not get to reassuring conclusions. But I know I don't think they're literally eating us.
One of them, I do think that rumors. I heard that grays are like biological artificial intelligence.
Yes. One of the reasons that people say that is based off of encounter experiences, I think, where the small grays appear not to have any emotionality to them, and where the small grays appear to be doing work for hidden others. So it's like they're the foot soldiers of another species. And I think that's what takes people in that direction. But the flip side of that is, I think one of the reasons we are interesting to some of our galactic neighbors is precisely because of our emotionality as human beings. Now, I say all life in the cosmos is related, and we should expect to see similar forms of life from other places, but there'll be something unique in every place. There's something unique about the blend of Homo sapiens, our blend of animal strength, our robustness, our robust physicality, our emotionality as mammals. Combine that with higher intelligence, you've got extraordinary capacity of imagination, compassion, love, creativity. And I think that blend is actually interesting to some of our neighbors. I think we have a more colorful experience of consciousness than, say, a small gray does, or some of our other neighbors may have. And I think it's one of the reasons that hybridization is going on, which I believe it is. Again, it's ancient ancestral story that our visitors are taking some of us because they want their descendants to be a bit more like us. And that may be because they're wanting their descendants to live here, be better adapted to planet Earth, but it may also be because they actually like how human beings tick. And the Bible's version of this abduction and hybridization story kind of says that in Genesis 6. It says that the beings who came, the Bene Elohim, the powerful ones, the ones like the powerful ones is how I would translate that. They come in Genesis 6 because they found human females beautiful. And that's perfectly understandable, of course. But I think there's a
Obvious.
deeper story going on there. Yes, Earth girls are hot, but I think its humanity is deeply attractive because of all these characteristics that we have. And they want some of that in their gene pool. That's the story that emerges when you listen particularly to African and Filipino ancestral story.
Hmm. I wonder what it is. They like. I mean, being human is not exactly fun. Having all these emotions either. You know.
No,
I
it is.
wonder.
It can be very. It
If.
can be painful.
I wonder
It
if
can be painful.
the hybrids themselves are like, oh boy, we messed this one up. And now we're like running around, freaking out.
Yeah, look, that's true. I mean, it's a double-edged sword what we have, but I frequently I have experiences, whether that's how can I put this? The wonderful experience of married life or the wonderful experience of a beautiful meal, and I think, isn't it great having all these senses? Isn't
Yes.
it great having these emotions? Isn't this an amazing experience we're having? And yes, there's the painful side to it too, but I do think that more sensual and robust physical experience that we have is of interest to some of our neighbors. And when you see a small gray that seems to have none of that, well, none of us would trade that life for the one we have.
I guess if they're only, especially if it just only exists within the black void of space, that's got to be kind of a lonely existence.
Well, that's right. I mean, we are not only fortunate in terms of the senses we have, our capacity for enjoyment and pleasure, but we've got a great planet.
Yeah, we have a place to live. Do you think um, when our ancient ancestors had contact with the extraterrestrial races, is there a reason why they didn't give them the technology that they seem to give us?
Well, yes, that's a good question. When I find stories of technology sharing from the past, let me give you two examples. So, my most recent book, if I can just quickly plug that, The Eden Enigma, focuses on stories around the world, but in particular, the carvings I found in Turkey, which speak to the sharing of agricultural science with our ancestors. And I think this happened on at least two occasions, about 10,000 years ago, or perhaps just on this side of the Younger Dryas Cold period, the most recent ice age. I believe there were visitations that helped our ancestors with agricultural science. But then when you listen to stories from, say, the Yolngu people, who are Aboriginal Australian people who live at the top end of Australia, or if you listen to stories told by the Iroquois people of North America, there is an earlier technology sharing, which is to do with how to live in balance with your environment and find food from the flora and fauna. There's that kind of technology sharing. And then, along with the 10,000 years ago technology sharing of agricultural science, there's megalithic building and the history of Babylon told by Berossus, who was a Greek Babylonian priest. Um, just oh, I I always get this date wrong, but it's around 300 BCE. He's writing, and he's telling us the story of how the Sumerians emerged, and then how the Babylonians emerged, how civilization seemed to spring from nowhere. And he said that agricultural science and megalithic building was the result of technology sharing by ancient visitors. So I would give those examples. And then the other one is the Book of Enoch, where the Watchers come down and they've breached some non-interference code, the Prime Directive, as it's called in Star Trek. They shouldn't have visited a pre-spacefaring population, but they did, and they came for some shore leave and for some action and for the Earth Girls. And apparently, the technology sharing there wasn't focused on megalithic building, but it did include metal science. So I'll leap forward into the Iron Age. And it also included cosmetics and food science and medical science. So, according to our ancestors, we've received a lot of significant things in the past. Right now, I think what we're looking at is the possibility of zero point energy,
Mhm.
the advantages of anti-gravitic technology, and then this technology to create a space-time bubble so that we can do interstellar travel. And I think once we have that, once the human race is an interstellar species, I think that's when the rules of engagement change. And that's why I think it's really helpful and important to shine the light of scrutiny on the processes we're in, because huge billion, trillion-dollar black budgets are going into aerospace corporations for them to develop this tech. And it's going to change things for all of us when they make the breakthroughs. And I think this should be something that has the light of public scrutiny on it. I'm not a great fan of huge black budgets, and I don't think the story of contact and who we are as a galactic species should be a secret.
Why do you think it's a secret? Do you believe the old idea that it's just because of religion?
I think that the policy of non-disclosure may not have originated with us. As I say, in the
Hmm.
past, our elders, our scribes had no problem writing about these things, and evidently people had no problem accepting them. I don't think public panic is the real reason. I think our visitors have a policy of non-disclosure. I think it's they who set this policy. Although, I mean, in recent years, the policy's been leaking like a sieve, and we've been in a process of soft disclosure, I think, to ensure against panic.
Hmm.
But I think that's where the policy really comes from. Nevertheless, I am a great supporter of processes of disclosure, declassification. I think you and I can't expect to be well represented in these crucial conversations if we're kept in the dark as to their very existence.
But like you said earlier, I think luckily they know better. It's because, like, doing this podcast, I have interviewed countless um, experiencers and the message that they've received, and so they do seem to make contact with a lot of people, and they don't seem to really even stay out of uh visible. I mean, like there's been landings in schools and stuff like that.
Yes, I love the landings in schools. I write about one of those in The Scars of Eden. That's the Australian story from 1966, an extraordinary mass sighting that even today is not acknowledged by the Australian government. This is Westall Primary School, which was buzzed by two flying saucers. And I just find it extraordinary that though that involved all kinds of emergency and military services and the press were there, 60 years later, the government is still saying nothing happened. So that's a really interesting case you can read about in The Scars of Eden. And then in Echoes of Eden, you can read about another school that was buzzed, which was Rua in Zimbabwe
Yes.
in 1994. And the great thing about that one is that they interviewed the children who were witnesses very shortly after that encounter. And the world's one of the world's leading clinical psychologists, Professor John Mack, went and interviewed some of the children. And you can watch those interviews on YouTube. So if you're a skeptic, go and watch that because I think you'll come away realizing these children are telling the truth about
Hmm.
what it was they saw. And yes, there's communication going on. So this is what's known as a close encounter of the fifth kind, where there was communication from the visitors to the children. And it was about our protection and the protection of the planet. And I think encounters like that encourage me that some of our visitors are not here to predate upon us or eat us or enslave us, but they're concerned about the planet and they're concerned about us.
What about telepathy? Do you think that most beloved encounters, you hear people say that the aliens spoke to them in their mind using telepathy? Do you think
Yes.
telepathy is a natural human ability that we have that sometimes we're discouraged against using?
Yes, I do. I think that it is a natural human ability, which to an extent we can develop, and some people are more sensitive in that area than others. I find it interesting that when we have babies, telepathy is the first place we go to try and communicate with our babies because baby can't speak and we can't understand the noises baby's making, but the communication from a mum or a dad to their baby is so intimate, so intense, and we desperately want to know what baby's trying to tell us. What does baby need? And so this is where we go. I'm trying to pick up what baby's saying. We have to rely on whatever degree of telepathy we have in that moment. Same with our pets. I mean, any dog or cat owner is in the same kind of mental dance where we're trying to communicate with each other without words. And those of us with dogs and cats find we can get a certain distance with that. So we're dipping our toe in the water of telepathy with those kinds of experiences. And I find it interesting when I listen to Aboriginal Australian story, for instance, that the understanding is that in the deep past, our ancestors were actually better at this than we are. That we, in effect, have invented technology to do things that our ancestors could do without it. So we've invented the television for remote viewing, for instance. We've invented the telephone for remote communication, but our ancestors had ways of heightening their cognitive powers to the point where they could do some of that without tech.
So maybe we just lost it over because we didn't need it anymore because we developed other forms of communication.
Yes, I think there's some loss by accident. If we read the Popol Vuh, it says we've been deliberately dialed down so that we're not too smart in that area. So there's a story in the Popol Vuh of Cucumatz, the chief genetic engineer, being called into an emergency meeting by the feathered serpents, who were telling him, "You've produced a Homo sapiens that is too clever, because they've got too much far sight and future sight. They've got too much empathy, telepathy. They're too good at self-healing. So we can't frighten and manipulate and lie to them. You're going to have to dial them down." And so Cucumatz comes up with a vapor that, when sprayed over human populations, dumbs us down to the point where we don't have those things anymore, where we can only see what's right in front of us. And for any other information, we have to rely on an authority telling us what's what. So that story says that our ancestors had more of this in the deep past than we do. And now there was a second thing I was going to say about that. Um, I'll have to come back to it when I remember it.
All right. All right. So I had prepared a weird question for you. I don't usually do this. Do you think what we call mythology may be humanity accessing something like Akashic memory field, where the same pattern keeps downloading into different cultures through different symbols?
Oh, that's great. That's a really good question. I think mythology contains a whole cocktail of stuff. I think there's a lot more cultural memory in mythology than we give it credit for. So I talked before about the language of feathered reptilians. I think that's cultural memory of actual beings. Many of our mythologies have stories of giants, little people, hairy people. I actually believe that's memory taking us back to a time when there were more hominids, more hominins on the planet. And we did have, I can never say his name right, Gigantopithecus sharing the plains with us. And we did have the Indonesian hobbits, Homo floresiensis, sharing the planet with us. And we've got stories of hairy people alongside smooth-skinned people. It's there in the Jacob Esau story in the Bible, which I believe is a human origins story. So I think we've got memory, we've got cultural memory there. But I believe in the Akashic aspect of what you're saying, that storytellers, whether we're talking about traditional shamanic storytellers in ancient cultures, or even script writers today, when they get into their creative mindset, I think can download very deep story, a very deep understanding of who we are, the truth of our past, the truth of our place in the cosmos. And storytellers will sometimes tell us the truth because they've tapped into information from this wider field, and they might not even know they're doing it. They might just be in their creative mindset and they've produced this incredibly resonant story. I've had that experience myself as a writer, a storyteller, and as a preacher. And I think memory does survive. Maybe the planet has a mechanism for preserving that kind of memory, just as we used to keep images and sounds in the magnetic field of magnetized tape. Maybe there's something about the magnetic field of our planet that holds memory for the planet. I don't know. I'm only speculating, but I do know that the experience of downloading story that is very deep and that then repeats through the ages, that is a real phenomenon. And you talk to any real creative, and this is no surprise to them. Often you'll hear people say, "I had to write this because I knew if I didn't write it, someone else would get it." And sometimes songwriters say the same thing. "I felt that I downloaded this song, that if I didn't write it and publish it, someone else would." That's a very real experience of information being held by some field that is beyond your brain and my brain.
I just had that experience not too long ago with the book I was writing. I felt like I had to
Oh,
get it
yes.
out. I had to get it done before somebody else did. I was like, this is just so obvious. I have to do
Yes,
this.
exactly. I was like that with Escaping from Eden, which is the first book in the Eden series. I had a real sense of urgency because I thought if I don't publish this, somebody else is going to publish it and they'll be running with this story.
Mm-hmm. It's a strange feeling, but you just feel like it's like, well, if it's so obvious to me, I'm sure other people are looking right at it. It's like in your mind, you're like looking at a screen and you're seeing it. And you think
Yes.
everybody else is seeing that same thing, but they're not. It's
And I think what's so interesting about that is that kind of suggests that, well, this is the time. This is the time for your book, Gary. This is the time for Escaping from Eden, because people around the world are waking up to these things. They have an appetite to explore this. They're ready to understand something new. And so there's a collective learning, I think, that's going on.
absolutely. I mean, that's what we're reason why you and I kind of are doing what we do.
Exactly.
So it's been great having you as a guest. Before we wrap it up, I just want to ask you one more question. What do you think is next for what type of disclosure do you think that you and I will get to type C within our lifetimes?
Oh
Do
gosh.
you
Well,
think we'll get the real answers before we die? Do you think we'll get to see the wormholes in action? Do you think we'll get to see any of it?
I think there's a lot going on right now. I think we are seeing a lot. So, I mean, at the moment, we can see film footage of the wormholes in action. If we're going to get more disclosure of, I mean, at the moment, we're only being shown the grainy film. I want to see the sharp focus film, which does exist. And I always forget the acronyms. SIPR is one of them. So it's this database of fill material and other material that military intelligence has access to that has not been declassified. Maybe we'll see a bit more of that. Maybe it is going to come out that we're in contact. I think we're more or less there, but we really want that focus statement, don't we? But what's next for humanity, I think, are the ontological questions that flow on from that. If we suddenly realize that we are part of a galactic ecosphere, that we are part of a cosmic family, then who we are and what we're capable of is suddenly on the table. And I would love us to reach that place where we're beginning to realize that humanity is capable of so much more collectively. We are capable of a happier life for everyone on planet Earth collectively. You and I are capable of higher cognitive abilities. I'd like to see us get there. And for me, that's more exciting than the idea of we might be able to visit Mars or we might be able to visit Alpha Centauri. I want us on Earth to be having a better experience. And I think if we can keep the conversation of disclosure moving forward, then we can get there. We're at a place in history where people around the world are really having to decide what they want to be. What do they want their societies to be? Do we want dictatorship? Do we want democracy? Do we want grassroots power? Do we want to move forward with more open information? We've got lots of decisions to be making in the 21st century.
We do have a lot of decisions to make, but we also have a lot of tools that we can use. Sometimes I think really there's no excuse for human suffering.
True.
We have enough resources to keep everybody alive.
Yes, we do. And fed and as healthy as they can be. Yes, that's where I'd like to get to.
Me too. And then we can take that out into space.
Absolutely. Can I just let people know where to find
Yes,
my
yes, please
books and
do.
such? You can keep up with everything I'm doing at paulanthonywallis.com. That's Wallis, PALLIS, paulanthonywallis.com. That's my personal website. Or you can go to fifthkind.tv. You can watch The Fifth Kind on YouTube or the Paul Wallis channel on YouTube. Get hold of your copy of the Eden Enigma and you'll discover the other books in the series. If you're interested in current processes of disclosure, the declassification of UFO files, the legacy program, and all of that, take a look at this book. That's The Invasion of Eden. And I think you're only the second show I've shown this, Gary, so you're very privileged. This huge, enormous, thick file that has just been released for pre-order as an
I just saw
ebook
that
on
your
Amazon.
website.
And the paperback is coming. That's The Dragons of Eden. And that's my collaboration with an Italian Bible scholar, Mauro Berino, where we show the case for paleocontact in the Bible. And we suggest that many of our familiar God stories are actually mistranslations of our ancestors' reports of ET contact. Now, if you want to come to Turkey with me, and I will show you these sites where these carvings lie that tell the Iron Age stories of ET contact, go to ancientknowledgetours.com. I'm going in October and I still have some places left. Or if you want to come with me and Praveen Mohan to Thailand, go to my website, paulanthonywallis.com, and go to Third Eye Tours. We're going in November just for a week. So it's a nice, easy tour. And it would be lovely to show you face to face these extraordinary places, these live excavations going on. And finally, ancientknowledgeacademy.com. If you want to deep dive into all the things I've talked about today, I've got an online learning community there, ancientknowledgeacademy.com, and we can get into a more personal conversation.
Well, it's been great having you. This is one of the best episodes I've done in a while. I'll take those links. I will put them in the notes of my episodes so my listeners can find you. And we'll definitely have to do it again. And it's been great having you. Thank you.
Great. Gary, it's great. And we mustn't leave it 5 years before the next one.
All right, we'll make it 4.
All right. Sounds good. All right, Gary, have a great day.
You too. I was going to play the outro.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Unity Manifest. Enjoy your experience.